Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Development Review Commission for February 12, 2019. We've got kind of an all-star cast here tonight as far as staff and commission, so let's introduce. To my left, we have Commissioner Andrew Johnson, Commissioner Phil Amorosi, and Commissioner Angela Thornton. I am Chairman David Lyon. To my right is Vice Chair Michael DiDomenico, Commissioner Barbara Lloyd, and Commissioner Tom Brown. From city staff, we have a bumper crop. We have Ryan LeVake, Obina Kingsby, Diana Kaminsky, Christopher Ray, Karen Stovall, Lee Jimenez, Blake Shimke, Steve Abramson, and in our audience we also have with us Mr. Chad Weaver. So, opening statement, folks. Development Review Commission is created to hold public meetings and hearings to provide analysis and recommendations to the City Council regarding general land use policies and applications where the Commission has recommendatory power, and to render final decisions on specified applications where the Commission has final decision-making power, including but not limited to all aspects of a proposed and future development. The Development Review Commission recognizes that the creation of a desirable environment throughout the city for residents, business, and industry is a prime requisite for the interdependence of land values, aesthetics, and good site planning by promoting harmonious, safe, attractive, and compatible development that is therefore considered to be in the best interest of public health, safety, and general welfare. All right, that's a mouthful. So, we have quite a lot to do tonight, folks. If there's a case that you wish to speak on, we have these nifty white cards at the back of the room on that little table. If you'll fill one out and provide them to one of our city staff members, they can get you on the docket, as it were. We can grant you a little time to make comment on these cases. We have two cases that we have proposed to put on our consent agenda. That means we would approve them without any further comment unless someone says they wish to hear one of these. Those two cases are Aufe University, located at 1835 East University Drive, and the other is Villas on 7th at 407 and 419 West 7th Street. Is there anyone with us tonight that wishes to hear either of those cases? Seeing none, we will keep those on our consent agenda then. So, first up, we will consider meeting minutes from our January 8th meeting. We have reviewed those and found no corrections to be made. Can I hear a motion regarding those minutes, please?
I move approval as drafted, the minutes of January 8th.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, motion to approve from Vice Chair DiDomenico, second from Commissioner Phil Amorosi. All those in favor by show of hands, please. Opposed, if any? And the motion passes 4-0 with Commissioners Brown and Thornton and Oh, I'm sorry. I may have missed a hand. Let's try again. Those in favor by show of hands, please. And opposed, if any. All right, so the motion passes 5-0 with Commissioners Thornton and Lloyd abstaining. Next up, we will consider our consent agenda. May I hear a motion regarding that, please?
I'd like to move approval of the consent agenda.
Second, please.
Second.
To approve the consent agenda as discussed from Vice Chair DiDomenico and seconded by Commissioner Johnson. All those in favor by show of hands, please. Opposed, if any. Okay, so the motion passes 6-0, is that right? Did I miss your hand?
I wasn't here. Are you talking about
the consent agenda?
Oh, I'm
sweetheart.
sorry. I'm so sorry. Yes, no, 7.
So the motion passes 7-0.
I'm here.
We're catching up, folks. Motion passes 7-0. Thank you. So I think, actually, should we go ahead and move ADOT University up, because since we are thinking that's a continuance?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right, so if we could, let's take a look at our ADOT University. Is our applicant here? We're looking for Sally Natalino. We've been told that you wish for continuous. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. We received the conditions provided. We met with staff this afternoon, and in order to adequately provide materials, we need to review the conditions further.
Okay, fair enough. And is there a date certain that you would request, or do you wish to delay indefinitely?
We have requested 3/12.
All right. So now let me just ask, is there anyone from the public that wishes to make comment or to hear this case? Any reason we should not continue? All right, well, I think we've heard all we need to hear on that one then. So may I hear a motion regarding continuing this case, please? Commissioner Johnson.
I move for the continuance of PL 190002.
Second?
All right, motion to continue to March 12th, is it? From Commissioner Johnson and seconded from Commissioner Thornton. All those in favor by show of hands, please. I'm being more careful this time. So the motion passes 7-0. Thank you. All right. So now we've taken care of those quicker things. Let's get into the meat of the evening. First up, we have University Business Center. Mr. Kingsby, please.
Good evening, Commission. Obina Kingsby, Planner 2 at the City of Tempe. University Business Center is located at on the north side of University Drive, about mid-block between Smith Road and Price Road, and it's part of an industrial park. The applicant is requesting a development plan review consisting of a site plan, building elevations, and a landscape plan for approximately 67,000 square feet of building additions. Sorry. The site currently only has one tenant, and the additions are to increase the office and warehouse area to improve the operational capabilities of the business. The additions are being applied to two of the buildings on site right now. The proposed material finishes consist of painted stucco, glazing, metal, and burnished CMU. All existing buildings that remain will be painted to match the color scheme of the new building additions. Can you go to some other? Yeah, okay, thanks. All right. Staff is recommending approval subject to conditions. The project will meet the development standards required under the Zoning and Development Code, and the project meets the approval criteria for the development plan review. As far as the design goes, I'll allow the applicants to go into more of the design aspects of the project, but I can answer any questions you have.
All right. Any questions for Mr. Kingsby? Thank you. All right, so let's invite our applicant to come tell us about the project. We're looking for Jim Larson, I believe.
Yes, that would be me. My name is Jim Larson, the Principal Larson Associates Architects. The project is a response to a request by West Pharma to increase their office space, increase their warehouse space, and increase their manufacturing space. We've been able to do all three through a series of additions to two of the buildings. We have a small warehouse addition on the east-north building and an office and warehouse addition to the north end of that building. On the southwest building, we have a two-story addition right up on University and a two-story addition on the other side of the building. We're bringing in new power. We're extending the fire lines for sprinklers to the new buildings. We're adding about 2,800 amps of power to the building. We have rooftop mechanical units to support the office and manufacturing space. The project is about 55 or 60% done in construction documents, and we expect to submit, assuming approval, we expect to submit floor plan review in about 4 weeks, between 3.5 and 4 weeks. We've met all of the requirements of staff review. As a matter of fact, we've had an enjoyable working relationship specifically with Kingsby. We're improving, at their request, we're improving the site lighting up to Tempe standards. As a matter of fact, we're stripping out all of the existing fixtures and replacing those all with low power use LEDs. We've removed one driveway at the request of city staff, which we actually believe is a correct decision also. And we've expanded the plant palette and have improved these, not only the plant palette per standards, but we're actually improving the existing landscape as well. We've had two late stipulations. One is to work with the area, industrial area planning, which we've agreed to deal with. And the very south building at the southwest corner, we've been asked to study a retaining wall, which right now is standard code height. And we're studying landscape and other ways that we might be able to minimize that as a screen so you can see more of the building. And that was at the planning director's request. So I'm available for questions.
All right, questions for Mr. Larson? Commissioner Brown?
You mentioned it's an existing business. Can we ask what they manufacture or sell?
The existing business is West Pharma, and they manufacture the housing and the mechanisms for injectable medicine.
Okay, so it's great that they are busy enough to need the space. If things were to slow down or they transition to a different location, such as the IDEA campus, are these multiple parcels that could be sold off?
At one time, this was a multi-tenant complex. West Pharma has agreed to an extended 10-year lease on the property with the improvements we have, extending on a 2.5-year remaining on their lease. So we expect them to be there for at least 12 more years.
I guess my question is this land owned by one person?
There are two parcels in that property. The answer to that question is yes. There are two parcels in that full discrete property. You can see the one that's excluded. That's a separate parcel, and the remainder is a single parcel.
Okay. I'm sure that, I'm pretty darn sure that the fire department and everybody else is okay with the density of the development and the passageways and the net open space. I did have a question or two, and maybe the answer is that they don't care about the public access. Is there a front door where people come, or is this strictly?
Very, very seldom is there any public there whatsoever. It's all business traffic, and the front door is going to be the southwest corner building.
That makes sense. That really was the gist of my comment. You've answered it, which is you're not particularly concerned about that. There are two renderings that are.
Actually, I'd like to tell you that the client would discourage the public coming there.
Yes. Well, if they're there for 10 years and business is booming and they move elsewhere, this will be reused in some way. So it is set up to be a front door, but of course it could be quite conceivably 4 different businesses that could occupy what would be 4 buildings someday. I did have a question about attachments 87 and 88, which are way back here. And in our discussion sort of between the study session and this moment, it looks like, apologize, a few more pages. There are multiple views where you're showing the building bare and then you've added a few trees to kind of show that landscape. But attachment 82 says building C and D southwest elevation from University Drive. Okay, that is, you've answered it. That would be the primary entrance. And attachment 87 is the southeast rendering from University Drive. Is that the same building?
That would be the front door.
Is attachment 87?
The one that's up, that was just up, not now, but
That
that
one.
one. That would be the front door.
Okay, but is that view looking north, southwest or north?
No, you're southeast of the building looking to the northwest. The building it actually extends around and there's more building on the existing building.
I guess I'm probably not reaching for any solid questions here. You've answered the question about the main entrance, and I really wanted to see, as I look through it, a lot of the buildings are rectangular and simple, and they're all beige, and it was sort of a sea of sameness. But this gives the opportunity for some punctuation. And that was really the main gist of my comment architecturally, that it's an efficient and solid use of space. I'm glad that they're busy, but I wanted to see a little more presence. And this is the main entrance off University, would be something like this. So I have no more questions. Thank you.
All right, any more questions for Mr. Larson?
Okay, thank you.
I'd just like to quickly say that I appreciate the effort to accurately model those site grades. Nicely done. All right, so is there anyone from the public that wishes to make comment on this project? All right, seeing none, we will close public comment, and we will ask for commissioner discussion and motions.
Question for staff. Has the applicant agreed to any and all stipulations as addressed in the packet?
Commissioner DiDomenico, they have agreed to all the conditions in the packet.
Thank you. Then to get the discussion started, I'll make a motion here. I recommend approval of PL 180298 University Business Center as drafted and with the stipulations included in the packet.
All right, do I hear a second?
I second that motion.
All right, motion to approve as written by staff from Vice Chair DiDomenico and seconded by Commissioner Amorosi. All those in favor by show of hands, please. Opposed, if any? I don't think there should be. All right, so the motion passes 7-0. All right, moving right along. Med Impact Garage Report. Mr. Kingsby again.
Hello there again, Commission. Me and Kingsley, Planner 2, CTP. Med Impact Garage is located on the northwest corner of Kyrene Road and Carver Road, which is approximately 1,900 feet south of Elliott Road. The applicant is requesting a development plan review consisting of a site plan, building elevations, and landscape plan for a new 5-level parking structure containing 425 spaces. The parking structure is proposed at a building height of 52 feet 3 inches, and the elevator shaft extends approximately 8 feet above that, which is allowed per code. All facades of the structure are shown to match the design and material finishes of adjacent buildings on site. Those primary materials consist of painted split-face CMU, smooth CMU, painted tilt concrete panels with score lines, and metal. As an accent feature, metal fans are being adhered to the front of the parking structure to provide more visual interest along the street frontage off Kyrene. Staff is recommending approval of this project subject to conditions. The project will meet the development standards required under the Zoning and Development Code. The project will meet the approval criteria for development plan review. And with that, I can answer any questions you may have regarding the project.
All right, questions for Mr. Kingsby? Thank you, Abina. Oh, wait.
Do you have one? So there was no neighborhood meeting on this one, not required, I take it?
There was no neighborhood meeting required for this, correct? It was strictly just a development plan review.
Okay.
All right, thank you. All right, we'll invite our applicant to come speak to us.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, Benjamin Tate with Withy Morris, 2525 East Arizona Biltmore Circle, on behalf of the applicant, which I guess is both CBRE, who's representing Med Impact, who's actually the user of this facility. So a little bit about Med Impact. So Med Impact Healthcare Systems is a pharmacy benefit provider. They acquired the building 8150, which is on that northwest corner of Kyrene and Carver, back in 2016 as their regional operations center for Med Impact. As they've seen their business grow, they actually acquired the rest of this business campus, which is 4 buildings, extending just to the north of that aerial. You can really see the end of it there. And what is being requested here, for the time being, Med Impact is moving into the 8060 building, which is the one on the north side of that gap there between the 2 buildings. And as their operations expand, they have additional parking needs in the area. And so they're requesting this garage to construct between the two existing buildings. As part of this, they will be replatting this into a single parcel, which will have a new address of 8120. It's currently zoned GID, General Industrial, and it's in the Southwest Tempe Overlay District. The most important part of that is rather than the normal 35 feet of height that they're generally allowed in GID, the SWOD gives them an additional 25 feet in height up to 60 feet. Here the applicant is only requesting 52 feet to the top of the parking structure. Here's just a couple rendered views of the existing campus, and you can see that space between the two buildings where the proposed structure will go. This is the original site plan from the development approval back in 1997 when the quads at Kyrene, the Kyrene Business Center was originally approved. So this is it's a 28,560 square foot parking structure. That's the footprint of the new building. It's 5 levels with 425 parking stalls. By building it there, they'll be cannibalizing about 116 of the surface parking spaces. So they're losing they're losing 116, but then adding 425 on top of that for a total of 682 parking spaces, including these existing surface parking around the two buildings, adding 18 bicycle parking spaces, only 10 required by code, so some additional bicycle parking there for employees. The parking structure, as Mr. Kingsby mentioned, will be designed and constructed to match the facades and building materials of the existing buildings, designed to blend in between the two buildings while still having some architecturally interesting features. One of the ones that he mentioned is those vertical metal fins that will be on the eastern facade there on the eastern elevation. There's just another rendered view of it. One of the other things that they'll be doing here is over the years since this was approved in the late 1990s, some of the landscaping on site has died, some trees have died, and so they will be refreshing the landscaping on site, improving the shade canopies along the walkways, as you can see here, leading into the parking structure. And then the rest of the slides here are just the plans that were submitted as part of this application. I'll take any questions you may have. If I can't answer them, the design team is here as well.
Vice Chair DiDomenico.
Operation, this is a call center. Obviously the need for a 5-story parking garage kind of speaks to the density of the employee base. Is this a single shift operation? Is this a 24/7 operation? How do they work their deal?
Well, just as a starting point, I think this is helpful to sort of understand as while they are, just as a starting point, while they're expanding into the 8060 building, for now, they are significantly overparked in terms of their parking requirements and what this garage. They are anticipating and planning for the future, since they've actually acquired all 4 buildings, that this will provide parking not only for these 2 buildings, but as they expand into the 3rd one and potentially the 4th, providing parking for those as well.
So if I could ask, I've just added up the square footage of the 2 that I see on the screen now, which is 100 and, I don't know what it is, 108,000 square feet or so. What's the entire buildable of all 4 buildings? I don't think we have any drawings that kind of expand to the other 2, so I can't tell that myself.
And I don't have that number off the top of my head. And while also planning for the future for Med Impact's operation, because they do own it and they will be leasing out those other spaces, the additional parking in this structure is also designed to help attract tenants who may need additional parking for those other 2 buildings as well.
Obviously, my concern is, it's GID, but it's across Kyrene from a gated community, Alisanos, with $750,000 to $1 million houses. And so this is really more of the impact of a high-density call center. And so it would be great to know that they don't operate in the evenings or through the morning like most call centers do. So I was hoping that was going to be the answer I heard, and I haven't heard that yet.
No, they have marginal off-hours operations. They're currently operating in the 8150 building exactly as they would operate in the 8060 building. But again, predominantly their shifts begin early morning. They cover the continental U.S., so East Coast time to Pacific. So their shifts are really predominantly around those time periods with a very minor call staff for off hours.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you.
All right, Commissioner Amorosi.
How high are the existing 8150 building and the other building? Yeah, I know the parking garage is 5 stories. What are the others?
I believe the existing buildings are approximately 32 feet. Yeah,
32.
roughly 32 feet.
Attachment 47 shows all 3 buildings, and you can kind of get an idea of the scale.
37. All right, thank you.
All right, any more questions for our applicant? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Does anyone in our audience wish to make comment on this case? Seeing none, I will close the public comment, and we will ask for our commissioner discussion. Thoughts? Motions? Commissioner Brown.
I was worried about the location, but I'm very familiar with the neighborhood, and those homes that are across Kyrene already are fronting a huge traffic load, and that's their back door. I think they live to the front door, which is internal. So as far as parking garages go, this is actually, the way it's stepped back between the buildings, I'd say it's one of the most acceptable parking garages that we've seen.
Other thoughts? Do I hear a motion? Commissioner Brown.
Commissioner, I move that we approve the Quads Garage, I don't have the case number handy, but sorry, as presented.
All right,
Med Impact Garage.
that'll do. Do I hear a second? All right, motion to approve from Commissioner Brown and motion to, and seconded by Commissioner Thornton. All those in favor by show of hands, please. Opposed, if any. And motion passes 6-0 with Vice Chair DiDomenico in dissent. Okay, moving right along. Thank you. Grooming humans. We have Ms. Karen Stovall.
Thank you very much.
All right. Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Karen Stovall, Senior Planner. This property is located on the west side of Rural Road, 1 lot south of Broadmoor Drive. The site has an existing building that was previously occupied by office uses but is currently vacant. The applicant is requesting a use permit to allow alley access to a non-single-family use parking area opposite a single-family zoning district. As you can see by the map on the left, there is R16 zoning on the west side of the alley. The applicant's also requesting a development plan review for site plan, building elevations, and a landscape plan. The applicant's proposing a 1,798 square foot hair salon within the existing building. The existing driveways on Rural Road will remain, and the semicircular drive will provide an area for deliveries and customer drop-offs. No parking signs will be posted in front of the building per stipulation. Vehicular access to the 7 on-site parking spaces would occur from the alley off of Broadmoor Drive, which is why the use permit is requested. A 498 square foot area on the west end of the building was originally designed as a patio and storage room, but was enclosed without permits by a previous owner. So the applicant will be obtaining permits to make that addition legal. Improvements to the landscaping will occur with the addition of pavers at the semicircular drive and street trees along Rural Road. Landscaping will also be added on the north and south sides of the building and at the ends of the parking rows at the rear. The east elevation will be remodeled with a new aluminum storefront, glass entry doors, and a metal canopy across the front. The canopy will support a business sign as well as screen the rooftop mechanical unit that's currently visible from Rural Road. Low planter wall will also be constructed of ground face masonry added to the east elevation. And the remainder of the building will be repainted, and the roof shingles will also be replaced. Staff is recommending approval of the use permit and development plan review, subject to the conditions in the staff report. Following the completion of the report, we did receive 2 emails in support of the project, 1 email opposed, and 1 phone call with questions. Copies of those emails were provided to you at the study session. And the individual opposed to the request stated concerns with commercial traffic in the alley, annoyances from sounds and people looking into her backyard, and concern with the property value. This concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right. Commissioner Simmons.
The 7 parking places in the back alley, are those also employee parking spots?
The 7 spaces are for both customers and employees, so that is the total provided for the business.
Okay, so do you have any idea how many employees would be like how many open spots would be back there during the day mostly? Like, I guess 7, so 3 or?
I'll defer that question to the applicant to answer how many employees are generally there.
Thank you.
Other questions for staff? All right, well, I will ask one if I may, Ms. Stovall. I know we've had a few cases over the years where we've dealt with using the alleyway for parking or for access, but I will confess that I still feel a little hazy on what our sort of conditions are that we judge this on, that this is acceptable. Can you talk just a little bit about how staff sees that?
Sure. So as far as the use permit request, that was evaluated in the staff report. We were looking at the business hours of operation, which are 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. So it's not, business is not going to occur in the early morning hours or late nighttime hours. There's also only 7 vehicle parking spaces, so that is a very limited number of employees and customers that would be driving back there. The alley is going to be paved. That is a requirement of the Public Works Department from Broadmoor Drive down to the south property line. I believe the closest street to the south is Alameda, so it wouldn't make much sense for someone to drive from that parking lot to go south all the way down the alley. They're more likely to just go 2 lots to the north and go back to Broadmoor. So this isn't going to cause much vehicular traffic in the alley except for adjacent to the 2 residential lots on the west side there. There is no expectation of a nuisance. This is not generally a business where individuals would gather in the rear of the business or in the parking lot. So those are the issues that we looked at.
All right, fair enough. Commissioner Thornton, quickly. Yeah, sorry.
It's really more of a comment. This is my neighborhood, and there's a lot of businesses up off of Rule and like Geneva and North that have already alley parking. And so, it's very, and I walk down those when I walk my dogs, so it's very normal in that neighborhood.
All right. Commissioner Lloyd.
When this was previously, so it says it was formerly office space, is that correct? When was that last occupied and in service?
I do not know the answer to that. I don't know when the previous office closed. It was a dentist office is the last record that we have, but I do not know.
And their access to the parking then was off the alley too, or was there a different way to access the parking?
Access to the site at that time and as it occurs today is from Rural Road. So there is, let's see if I can do this. Okay, so right now there are driveways here and here. It leads to a semicircular lot here. Access right now actually runs along the north side of the building, and then parking is on the west side of the building. There is currently a wall here, and so that makes circulation into that parking lot somewhat difficult. And I've looked at older aerial photos, and cars are kind of parked every which way. There's not really any order in the parking lot.
And I'm sure you looked into it, but any way to get back to the parking from Rural?
The applicant would be permitted to use the access that exists today, but it's, like I said, there's really no order back there. Judging from the aerial photos, it doesn't look like there's any parking lot striping, and I don't see how we would stripe it today to comply with our code requirements of the minimum depth of the parking spaces plus the minimum backing distance for vehicles. So yes, the applicant could use the site as it's laid out today. It's not really the best design, though.
Thank you.
To follow up on that same point, so there's no requirement to have that alley, the wall in the alley, so they could remove the wall, still access from Rural Road, but then be able to use the alley for more turn radius and backing in and out and still park their cars on their property, just not access directly from the alley.
If they were to remove the wall from that west property line, they would need to come in and do a development plan review for a site modification.
Why would that be? There's a lot of properties
It's
in
a
that part of
commercial,
town.
yeah, it's a commercial property, and in order to make a modification like that, removing a wall adjacent to the alley, it would require a development plan review.
But if it was a residential property in Maple Ash, for example, being used as a residential property, they wouldn't need to have fencing on their in their backyard.
If it was a single family residence, we would not require a wall along that west property
Okay,
line.
so we have alleys that don't have walls on the along the alleyway. Okay, thank you.
Oh, now I see where I went astray. I thought they were taking that wall down.
They are taking the wall down.
Oh, I'm sorry. So I misheard you just now.
Well, my question was more if people weren't to go northbound or southbound in the alley in order to get to their parking space, could they still come in off of Rural, come down the side of the building, and still turn into these same spaces that would then be lined? So I was trying to get to whether it's more the traffic up and down the alley past everyone's house was an issue, and not so much the current situation where everybody's still parking back there. There's still cars back there.
All right. Now I'm up to speed. Thank you. All right. Any other questions for Ms. Stovall? Well, then we'll ask our applicant to come and tell us about the project.
Good evening. My name is Brad Holtquist. I'm the owner of Grooming Humans Hair Studio. It's my wife, Jane. We've been in business since August 1st of 1988, Forest and University. We had 2 locations for about 7 years, and we'll be, due to the construction, we need to be moving out. So we bought this building about 3 years ago in April, and we've been going through the process for a little bit now. So what kind of questions can I answer for you?
All right.
Well,
Commissioner Thornton.
I'll ask you my question about the parking spots. How many employees do you anticipate?
Well, in
So
all
how many
reality,
open spots, really?
3 to 4 employees, some part-time. This is going to be kind of my retirement business, and so you can expect somewhere between 2 and 3 cars at most, up to 4 an hour, but that would be at most. So I would have about 3 full-time employees, including myself, and a part-time or 2.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Commissioner
You
Brown.
just said 2 to 4 cars per hour. You mean for customers?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm trying to compare this to a recent case where we approved a residential townhouse development with 20-some units directly across, back to back. It's essentially a continuous row of parking. And I want to be sure we sort of see this balance, not that 2 wrongs make a right, but that the number of cars per day may be less objectionable than 20 townhouses with students. Just to grasp that.
This will be a very quiet business, I can assure you.
And I appreciate that with the pavement, it should be less dusty in the alley than what they have now.
All right. Other questions? Vice Chair DiDomenico.
So the circular drive off of Rural, is that meant to be customer parking? So
No,
employees?
That's delivery and drop-off.
Okay. So that's if somebody's dropping off someone who's going to
Mail,
get your
product
service.
delivery,
Okay.
someone who's dropping off and a customer maybe.
Okay, but not really enough room to parallel park 2 or 3 cars in
No.
front? Okay.
Commissioner Thornton.
Didn't we hear that you were going to have no parking signs on the circular drive?
Yes. That's part of the conditions.
Other questions? Well, thank you then.
Thank you.
So I don't have any white cards regarding this case. Does anyone wish to make comment on this case? Seeing none, we'll close the public comment and go to our commissioner comments. I'm going to start off by saying that I really like this idea that the east side becomes a drop-off and people don't have to pull in and out of traffic directly onto rural. And I'm warming to this idea of this back alley parking. As I say, I don't know very much about that, but it sounds like a good idea, and this looks like a good thing to me. All right, so other commissioners, your comments. Commissioner Lloyd.
You know, I agree. I like the adaptive reuse of the site. I think Rural Road is, you know, a welcoming environment for that. I do see in the conditions of approval that if there are any complaints arising from the use permit, then it'll be reviewed in the future. That's correct, right? Just that does remain my concern, is that even though the applicant stated only 2 to 3 employees at a time, you know, I've been in the salon. I know that you may have more stylists there. So I just want to make sure that, you know, that I think the sensitive nature of knowing that you are up against residential behind you, and we want to make sure there's not overflow into the neighborhood with parking, and that becomes an issue, is I think something we need to keep an eye on. But I like the reuse of the property.
All right, other comments? Commissioner Thornton.
I really like the reuse of the property too, since it's my neighborhood. And I just want to reiterate that we do have a lot of the alley parking, especially up towards the Walmart and all those, and they've been there a long time, all those businesses have. I also love your materials palette, and I love the design of the front of it. It's such an eyesore right now, so I'm really looking forward to having you guys fix this place up. Thank you.
All right, more comments or motions?
I'll make a motion.
Vice Chair DiDomenico, stole that from none of you.
There we go. Quick trigger finger. I move for the approval of PL 180248 with stipulations as presented in our packet.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All right, motion to approve from Vice Chair DiDomenico and seconded by Commissioner Amorosi. All those in favor by show of hands, please. And the motion passes 7-0. Thank you. All right. Two. Mr. Jimenez.
Good evening, Chair Lyon, members of the commission. My name is Lee Jimenez. I'm a senior planner with the Community Development Department in the Planning Division. Camden Hayden is a new 397-unit mixed-use development proposed on an 11.9-acre site, which is currently located on the northeast corner of East Curry and North College Avenue in the GID, General Industrial District, and within the GIOD, General Industrial Overlay District. The adjacent zoning districts consist of R4 to the north, PCC1 to the northeast, R5 to the east, GID to the southeast, R4 to the south, AG to the southwest, and R16 to the west. The general plan projected land use is commercial for the site with a projected residential density of medium to high density, which is up to 25 dwelling units per acre. The adjacent general plan land use designations consist of residential to the north, mixed use to the east, a combination of mixed use, civic, and industrial to the southeast, and residential to the south and public open space to the west. The requested entitlements consists of a general plan projected land use map amendment from commercial to mixed use, a general plan projected density map amendment from medium to high density, to high density, which is up to 65 dwelling units per acre. The zoning map amendment, changing from GID and the GIOD overlay to MU4 PAD, and a PAD to establish development standards for a new mixed-use project with a density of 34.25 dwelling units per acre, a maximum 63-foot building height, 26% lot coverage, and 35% landscape area with defined building height setback, building setbacks, and parking requirements. Just for clarification, the initial parking study stated that there were proposed 616 off-site parking spaces, which at the time included parallel spaces on the adjacent Camden site to the east. Since then, the applicant has removed those the number of parallel spaces provided on that site and just kept the PAD to include all the parking that will be provided on site. Just for further clarification, the study noted that 562 spaces would be required based on the findings. The current code as it is would require 739 parking spaces. The site plan consists of 7 buildings, 3 or 4 stories, and I'm sorry, 7 buildings, 3 or 4 stories along the street frontages, and 4 stories within the interior of the lot, with one being a 3-story building, which is located at the rear of the site. The proposed lot coverage is 26%, with 34.9% proposed landscape coverage. The minimum setbacks provided from the front along College Avenue is 20 feet, 15 feet street side setback provided along Curry, and with a 25-foot side setback from the sides and an 88-foot rear yard setback from the rear along the northeast section of the property. An amenity pool area is provided behind Building 1, and a total of 382 bicycle parking spaces are required and provided on the site. A total of 562 off-street spaces are required per the parking study. Some are uncovered parking and some are uncovered, and there are uncovered spaces provided outside of the secure perimeter of the site. The main pedestrian and vehicular entry to the development is located on the southeast corner of the site from Curry, and a secondary entrance is located on the northwest corner from College Avenue. Camden Hay will provide a new bus shelter on northbound College Avenue north of Curry, as well as stripe the final segment of bike lane along the same stretch of road, which will complete a bike lane link between the cities of Tempe and Scottsdale. Furthermore, Camden Hayden is also proposing off-site improvements consisting of a dog park on a vacant parcel of land owned by the city, which is located on the southeast corner of College and Weber. If the project is approved, Camden Hayden will be conditioned to obtain approval for the minor DPR for the proposed dog park prior to submitting for building permits, execute an operations and maintenance agreement that provides reasonable hours of operation, be open to the public, and contain a maintenance obligation by Camden and not the city for the dog park prior to the issuance of building permits, and then ultimately complete the construction of the dog park prior to issuance of a certificate of occupancy for the Camden site. The landscape plan provides a plant palette containing of 10 tree species, an assortment of 34 different types of shrubs and vegetative ground cover, providing nearly 35% landscape coverage. The tree species consists of Chinese pistache and Chinese elm, with ghost gum provided as specimen trees along the intersection of College and Curry, as well as the main entry from Curry. The dog park is lined with street trees consisting of Chinese pistache and Chinese elm will be provided within the turf areas of the dog park. The maximum building height is 60 foot 10 inches, which is the tower elements, and the parapet roof line is 54 feet and 10 inches in height. The primary building material for the buildings consists of painted stucco with accents of painted wood-like composite wall panels, which will will be installed in a lapping manner. The storefront of the main entry and stairwell are finished with integral concrete block. The storefront system for the amenity and leasing area, as well as the live work units, consists of dark bronze aluminum finishes. The windows are clear colored low E glass. The interiors of the interior building are similarly finished, a part of the less of the wood-like composite panels. A total of 5 different paint colors are used throughout the site, consisting of a primary cream color with darker gray and warm tone accents. The proposed density is 34.25 dwelling units per acre, which consists of 395 dwelling units and 2 live work units. A total of 14 studios, 257 one-bedrooms, 124 two-bedrooms, 1-bedroom live work unit, and one two-bedroom live work units will be provided, totaling to a total of 522 bedrooms within 489 square feet of building area, which also includes indoor amenity areas in Building 1.
All right, Lee, can I interrupt for a moment? Can you tell us again how many live work units there were? I thought I saw that.
2 live work units. One is a 1-bedroom and the other is a 2-bedroom.
All right, thank you.
So a neighborhood meeting was required and held on December 18th, 2018, from 5:30 to 6:30 at the North Tempe Multi-Generational Center. So far today, 1 public comment has been received. The comment supported the residential component of the project, but opposed the means to obtain the proposed density with the minimum amount of residential uses to be deemed a mixed-use development. And regarding the concern from that public comment about the additional items possibly being added at a later time, I just want to clarify that if the number of units increases by a certain percentage, and I believe it's 10% of residential units, that would trigger this entire project to go through the same process as it is this time around. So it would require another neighborhood meeting, another separate application for the PAD and DPR, and any other associated entitlements. And also, to add to that, the outreach to the stakeholders regarding the general plan amendments resulted in comments from SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office, and the City of Scottsdale, wherein the communication or correspondence is provided in the attachment section of the project development file. So as of noon this past Friday, the recommended conditions of approval and the staff report were revised to remove inadvertent left behind conditions of approval that do not pertain to this project, or the scope of this project, excuse me, and also to further specify the type of DPR applications required for the proposed offsite improvements, which both will be processed at an administrative level. As indicated in the staff report, staff believes this request conforms to the respective approval criteria and supports the project subject to the recommended conditions of approval in the staff report. And I'll be available to answer any questions if you have any.
All right, questions for Mr. Jimenez? Vice Chair DiDomenico.
Just to clarify, one question that I had asked you right after pre-session to address, and you touched on it, the City of Scottsdale made a recommendation to require the applicant to either dedicate more land for the bike lane between Curry and Weber, and if the amount of land was sufficient to just stripe that section so that it continues the bike path. And I believe you told me that that the applicant was going to do that and finish that striping.
Co-Chair Michael Domenico, that is correct. The applicant has agreed to, it's not dedicating any additional easements. It's basically restriping the traffic lanes and providing that bike lane along that route of that segment, which would complete the segment between Scottsdale and Tempe in this area.
Continuous bike lane, and I think it said it goes all the way to Thomas Road, which is in Scottsdale where my office is. So I can actually ride my bike now all the way there, and I don't have to miss that. But that was what was holding me back before. So
That is correct.
yeah, that and the distance. Other than that, And the bike.
All right, Commissioner Brown.
Lee, could you repeat that business about a 10% increase would require a new PAD? I was writing some numbers down, adding up bedrooms. And yeah, I believe you said that if a change was made that involved 10% or more increased number of units, that would then require a PAD. Is that, did I read?
Chair Brown, or Commissioner Brown, if I could clarify, the percentage increase relates to the total number of bedrooms. So if the project is increasing what's allowed beyond the density being proposed in the project, that'll automatically require a major amendment to the request based on the density projection that they've requested.
Any change or 10%?
Any change. So the 10% relates to the bedroom count. So if there's a change in shift in the bedroom types that creates a 10% or more increase in the total number of bedrooms.
Thank you.
I guess I have a question which is along somewhat similar lines, and I apologize as well. I was trying to operate my iPad while you were talking, and I think you were touching on this. I feel some concern about this being a mixed-use project with 2 live-work units and the rest residential. Can you talk about what do we consider, what do we need to trigger this to be mixed use, and at what point do we say, hey, this is really a residential only project?
Chair Lyon, the code does not have a minimum requirement for the amount of different uses that are provided on a mixed-use project. So there is no set parameters as far as what's required for a project to be deemed a mixed-use project. The applicant is proposing 2 live-work units, which are located in the main entry area of the project, which is access through Curry on the main driveway, with the guest and customer parking provided in that parking lot.
Okay. And if we were to say that those 2 live-work units went away and we considered this as purely residential, can you help us understand how this application would be different? How would the standards be different?
I believe
LeVay wants to chime in, that's all right too.
I guess just to clarify, is because of it's a mixed-use designation request, there's a requirement for mixed use, both commercial and residential, in either vertical or horizontal situation. So in this case, the applicant has applied to utilize live work in some of the identified units for the project site. The mixed-use zoning doesn't allow just residential unless there was other phases of commercial components on the project site that were being proposed.
Right. But what I'm saying is I feel like I'm really seeing a residential project here, and we're technically over the line of 0% work units. So if it was 100% residential, what would the standards, how would the standards be different that we'd be looking at tonight?
The highest multifamily zoning density district that we have currently right now is the R5 zoning, and that allows 30 dwelling units per acre. So they'd be a little bit lower in density, but could achieve similar standards based on this project. It would be a different type project.
All right. Mike? Any other questions for Mr. Jimenez? Thank you. All right, Mr. Huell now.
Thank you. We're proud to be here tonight to present not only Camden 2, but the Domenico Express route to work for bikes. So I guess the bike exchange in part is part of the mixed use, perhaps. Actually, let me address the mixed use question first as I go through the presentation, because I think that's important. When we, it was a long time ago, and I sat in a similar chair, and we talked about how to deal with the code. We intentionally left that as a vague category because mixed use means lots of different things to lots of different areas. I think most people think of mixed use and they think of a beautiful apartment building with a French supermarket market below, and that's an awesome thing if you can achieve it. In some places you can. The thing that often happens next instead of that is vacant space. And that's something that has been problematic in some communities, and easy to fill in others. In this case, we have worked quite a bit with many of the neighbors who you'll see here today. In particular, Darlene Justice has been concerned for some time about having too much retail in this area. And in fact, what's happened is some of that retail has been used for less desirable uses. And so we were sensitive to that as we moved forward and tried to determine what mixed use would be. We think that there are some advantages to having mixed use, not only the density, that certainly helps us, but it does change the character as to what happens, particularly that hard corner of Curry and College. The other thing that I think we'd ask you to consider is that we're doing something else, something that frankly I haven't seen others do, which is take the piece of land the city owns that has on it some challenges and as a result has been a long since vacated parking lot, and we're making that a dog park. It's not a dog park just for us, it's a dog park for the community. It's one that we'll take care of. That helped us work both with the neighbors, I think, but also to further expand mixed use. And I would argue that part of the reason the code leaves vacant the idea of what mixed use is so that you can find creative solutions to find mixed uses that fit for a particular area. And I would argue, I guess selfishly, that we've done a pretty good job of finding a really creative use, something that will really benefit not just us, but the rest of the community. I suppose it's not commercial in the sense that we're not charging people to use the dog park, but we're also paying for it. So I guess you're charging us to use the dog park that then becomes a commercial use. We have worked hard to find a way to make this site work, and I think it's important to talk about how we got here before we talk about what we're proposing to build. This is a progressive site. It's owned by Progressive. It's been Progressive for a long time. It frankly has not been an ideal neighbor. Camden now currently owns both of the projects on either side of this. We didn't build either one, but we own both now. And we have had a problem with the Progressive site. Frankly, it is a fenced site. There's not much activity. There's almost no activity that's lawful at night. And what ended up happening is we found all kinds of undesirable uses in that parking lot. So over time, we approached Progressive and tried to find solutions to those problems. You can imagine that if you lived in an apartment community, you probably wouldn't want to be next to an empty parking lot that was fenced but not really secured. And so after a fair amount of discussion, Progressive decided that they really didn't want to fix the problem, but they didn't necessarily want the site either. And so they gave us an option to purchase the property. It was not a fire sale by any stretch of the imagination, but we figured it would work well for us. It would solve the problems that exist and transition an otherwise GID site into residential. That's important for us. We think for others too. GID use is what's zoned today and would allow all kinds of uses that would not be desirable to our residents as it stands today. I think anyone who's lived in Tempe for any amount of time certainly knows this area, so I won't spend a lot of time talking about it. But this is what the site looks like today on a busy day. Another use could come in and be significantly more busy, so this has advantages and disadvantages to being largely vacant. But if something else came in, it could have uses that we don't like, and it could have traffic that we don't like. One of the things we heard early on from neighbors is the Camden project, which is at Scottsdale and Curry, had some deficiencies. Worked well for us, but maybe not so much on the outside. And so we stepped back, and we certainly have an understanding that buildings work for two sets of people. They work for the people who live in them and work in them, eat in them, but also that second set of people. And we heard complaints about that. The people that happen to walk by it, drive by it, or even bike to work, as Mr. DiDomenico will now do regularly, we hope. And so we worked really hard on not only the landscape package, but also doing a product much different than before, where we had a wall that sort of separated the people. So the project today that you see has a number of things that I'd like to talk about. At both openings, we provided lots of additional space. We tried to set the building back, but use door fronts instead of walls. We tried where possible, and there are a few places where that doesn't exist, but we tried to provide detached sidewalk with trees on both sides to provide a much better pedestrian experience. There are a few places where the city's utilities don't allow that, and so you'll see on your plans that there are a few places where that waivers. We tried to provide a pretty robust plant palette, and we did all this working in close cooperation with not only the planning department, but also the water utilities department. As you might imagine, this is an area where a lot of utilities come through. Because of the mountain terrain, there aren't many options for it. So we had some real obstacles. I'll also point out at the same time, we didn't actually remove the parking spaces that are on the east side of the property as you come in that are the parallel spaces. What we're doing is simply putting them under a separate application. Those parking spaces were designed on land that's owned on the current existing building. So rather than replot that property as well, we're simply putting the same spaces that we had proposed before, but on an amendment to the property that already existed. So they are, as you see them in the plans, there's not a shorter number of parking spaces. They're just associated with the other project, even though this is the driveway that you would use to get them. It seemed administratively a cleaner way to deal with the project. We have, as you saw, a fairly deep project, and so we really worked hard to provide more expensive materials on both College and on Curry. We hope that you can see that in this rendering. I want to show you a little bit more about how we work through not only the bike lanes, but then an area for landscaping, a wider area for pedestrians, and then an area that's pretty significant between the building and the sidewalk. And it varies from place to place. As you get to the corner, we have the live-work units, and you have that little courtyard. It goes almost to 60 feet on this side, 53.6, but it goes back and forth in several places with landscaping in each of those locations, and where we can on both sides of the sidewalk, and where we can't, we've tried to still provide space. The same is true on College. We have, in fact, this is the first time in Tempe, I guess I can say that we have the support of staff from the city of Tempe and I suppose Scottsdale. It's a new one for me, but their requests seemed reasonable, and we were able to work with both Scottsdale and the city of Tempe's transit department to work on, and planning department to work on ways to combine both the bike lane and the bus pullout, which doesn't exist today, but that we're putting in. Again, you still have space between the car, the bike, the landscape, the sidewalk, and then more landscaping before you get to a building. I think it's also important to look, as you look at this particular landscape plan, not only do you see pretty significant treescape, also, as I mentioned before, the dog park, we think that's not only a first of its kind, but it really helps us both in terms of taking care of an eyesore, providing a usable amenity to our residents, but also a usable amenity to other residents, and hopefully fostering a greater sense of community by having that shared amenity. Again, this is something that Tempe doesn't otherwise have. They will have it, but Tempe won't have an additional financial burden to take care of it. I'm pretty proud of that. It's worth pointing out that this site is particularly walkable and bikeable, maybe not for me at the moment, but in general. And you've got access to Tempe Town Lake, downtown, a short walk or bike ride to light rail, the Indian Bend Wash, and all the amenities related to that. And Tempe now has bike paths that go all the way out to Mesa and Cubs Stadium as we get closer to spring training. So we think that this is a great location for more residential, especially when you consider that but for rezoning, the site is GID. It's an industrial site adjacent to park space and other things, and we just think this is a great location, situated next to two sets of multifamily already. If it's going to be something, we think that it makes sense to make it multifamily, and we think it makes sense to expand what we've already learned and work to improve. A couple renderings. I think you have these in your packet, but again, we tried to provide significant space at both entrances and at the corner. We took back a number of units and working with staff, provided sort of that courtyard feel. The live-work units, we think, in addition to providing the technical qualifications, which I think there's no doubt we meet for mixed use, but it also helps justify why you would do something at the corner like that and to change the feel. Again, we'd ask you to consider the dog park as well. I know there are a number of people here who would like to speak, and I certainly would like the opportunity to rebut, but are there questions I can answer for the commission?
Hey, commissioners, questions? Commissioner Brown. Commissioner Amorosi.
Do you know what the height of the first Camden units are?
I do. Give me 1 second here. So Camden Hayden is 61 feet, so, which is the first Camden, which is
First
Scottsdale and Hayden.
Okay.
Sotelo, which is a little bit higher elevation, naturally is 48 feet. And we're proposing 54 feet with 62 feet at the tower element. It's actually 55, roughly, 5410. Excuse me, 5410.
Thanks.
Commissioner Brown.
Mr. Hulemantel, so you are, I believe, have 35.25 dwelling units per acre, but you're
Yes.
asking for a zoning classification under the MU of 65 with the PAD.
34.25, I believe it is.
So worst case, let's just say someone comes in and offers a lot of money to your client and they are in business and they make that offer, a truth or an occurrence. If someone buys this property, does the zoning continue? You mentioned, I think, that they would need to do a new PAD, but we know that the council approves every PAD they see.
No, we certainly don't know that, but that may be your opinion. On that side of the chair, it's much easier to believe. It's uncomfortable sometimes from here, I'll tell you that.
If the land is sold, does someone else get a piece of land that's zoned for 65 units per acre?
Well, let me answer that in a number of different ways, and I think Ryan will confirm. First of all, you're not zoning at 65 units per acre. You're only potentially recommending changing the general plan to that. The zoning is I believe, 34.25 units per acre. So if somebody else comes in, for the period of time, there's a year for the site plan and 2 years for the zoning itself, and then the city can revert that zoning. But the zoning that somebody could buy is exactly this project. It's nothing more. And there was some discussion earlier about, could we find a way, since we have additional parking, could we find a way to sneak in additional units? And the answer is no. My understanding is we can't. If we ask for additional units, we must go back through the public PAD process. That's a major amendment. Now, that didn't used to be the case. And 5 years ago, and probably less, maybe it was 3 or 4 years ago, at some point the council changed the PAD ordinance specifically to require a number of things. One of them was you couldn't just do a PAD, which is exactly the thing you're asking for. Do a PAD, have it general, and come back and do the DPR later. That's not allowed anymore. When we come in now, we have to do the PAD and we have to do the DPR. So we're now stuck to two things: this particular zoning and this particular site plan. The second thing it did was limit how long you could have that for, and the third thing that it did was make specifically clear that if you ask for additional residential units, it was major, and if it's major, it goes back neighborhood meeting, DRC, council. So they would, unless they wanted to build exactly the thing we have approved, they'd have to go back through the council.
You've answered my question, thank you.
All right, other questions? Thank you, Charles.
Thank you.
All right, so now I know we have a couple of people who wish to speak. Again, if you wish to make comment and haven't already, there are cards at the back that you can fill out and hand to our staff. First I have is, I believe, Lana Caraway. Is that right? Oh, sorry, Lane, sorry. Yes, if you wish to speak, Mr. Caraway.
Hi, my name is Lane Caraway. I live 1422 North Sunset Drive in Tempe, Arizona, which is directly probably one of the first homes that would be impacted by this development. And my family is for this project. We think it's a good use of the space. I can assure you and attest that the drugs, the homeless that are in the back of this property as it is right now is ridiculous. It's a burden to the city. The empty lot that has been there for years that the city of Tempe has neglected, and it's been an eyesore for my community as well as other people driving and going from this. We really support this, and every citizen I have spoken to in my neighborhood has been for this project. We look at it as something, a change that will hopefully drive up the fact that maybe other businesses would like to come in and do something along Scottsdale Road, and instead of us being in a barren blight zone there, we understand that we need a little bit more density to get those type of amenities in our community, and we're for this project. Thank you.
All right, any questions for Mr. Caraway?
Yes.
1 second, please.
Yes.
Mr. Caraway, it doesn't bother you that they're asking for maximum density when this isn't a downtown area and it's not a major street like Scottsdale Road?
Actually not. I will tell you, I have become friends with numerous people that live in Sotelo. In fact, one comes over, she has a leg problem, she does drive through my neighborhood, she waves, she stops. She's been invited to our block parties. Several other individuals, as far as friends that live in Camden on Scottsdale and Curry, same incidents. I have people that live there. In fact, there are city employees that live at Sotelo and the other complex that I'm aware of, and we have a good relationship. And I think the fact that you're putting in a dog park, hey, that's only going to bring in more community spirit mixing in together. So as far as the worry about the density, it's going to happen, and I'd much rather have it where we can have a little bit better control of it so that down the road we're not trying to push too much in there. And Curry and Scottsdale Road is always busy. Of course, when you go past the 202 with ASU, then you have issues. But that's been like that for 5 years. When I have to come down here to Tempe, some days 5 minutes, I'm stuck on the bridge on the north side, going to the Tempe Museum. It could take me 5 minutes or 45 minutes. So it's hit or miss, but I know for most of the people I'm aware and socialize with, we look forward to this project.
Any others?
Thank you.
Commissioner Johnson.
Thanks for speaking today. I appreciate it. I'm just curious. I don't know which way to go first. I guess I'll say with the landscaping palette, it's a huge improvement over what's currently existing there. But in the context of where it is and the surrounding area, I was a little. I thought there would be more native plants, more desert type plants, and I was just curious if, from a resident's perspective, if you had an opinion on that.
Yeah, Papago Park is a grass area. I know we have the desert parks just on the other side of that, but when I hear this, well, we need to keep desert because we're a desert city. When people aren't going to jog and run on rocks. Let's be realistic. They're not going to be out there in 110 degrees where there's no shade.
Mm-hmm.
I'm for this. In fact, I would love to see more density as far as shade goes so that you can walk. I mean, and with the previous Camden Hayden, they didn't just go with the 2-foot boxes. They went beyond the call of putting in very large trees. And I think that shows that they are concerned about, the walk, amenities for outside, where it's riding a bike, walking through the neighborhood.
Sure.
And going to the parks, and the connection there is right there to the parks, Papago Park, and then you can go to the trailhead and you can go to Tempe Town Lake. Mm-hmm. My neighbors do it every day, twice a day, in the morning and in the afternoon. I have like 4 or 5 of them that walk past my house in the morning and the afternoon, and they love the concept because with the homeless that go in there at nighttime sometimes, and they're trying to walk right in the morning, just as it's getting daylight, they don't feel comfortable with that. And at least this way, that'll help clean up some of the issues. And also, our police won't have as much to worry about at that point of going back there, because I don't know if you guys have been back there, but you really should walk back there and see how large the space is and how barren it is and how the homeless and everything are in there.
We take your point.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. I think this says Deborah Zajac. Perhaps I've got that wrong.
Hi, my name is Deborah Zajac. I live at 1711 North McAllister. And I just want to start off that I am not opposed to residential project at this corner. I think it's a prime piece of real estate. We're walking distance to the town lake. All the availability to when Watermark gets complete. You've got the Orbit, which will take you to the transportation center. So I'm not opposed to developing this corner. What I do have some concerns about is I think this project can be improved upon. And I did write to Lee about this, and Mr. Humantle answered some of the questions as he spoke today, because I was concerned about the zoning. When he came to speak with us as a group, he stressed this was a residential project. But then when I called and I asked him about the zoning, and he said it's GID, but never said what it was. And when I spoke with Lee, he's the one who informed me about it being multi-use, and it was because of the 2 live-work units. The other thing that I got clarified when Mr. Humantel just spoke was in regards to the parking. Because I know that when the other Camden Hayden was being proposed, they were arguing for fewer parking spaces. And this one, from my understanding, it had additional parking spaces. And I thought that, well, if there's additional parking spaces, they can expand this project. So I guess that has been answered. But I do think that based on what I saw from the other Camden Hayden, I still think that this project could have more open space. To me, it still looks like a wall with buildings. There is a little more landscaping because I think the other Camden Hayden, that looks like a fortress over there. If you look at the way the Camden Saltillo is over at Weber and College there, there's open space between the buildings. And as a pedestrian or if you are driving a vehicle, you can see within there. And this to me, when I mentioned that during a meeting, it looks like just a wall with windows. At least there's windows as opposed to the other one. He said that there's more open space, but it's on the inside. If you look at some of the developments that are going up in South Scottsdale, because being in North Tempe, we're actually closer to South Scottsdale developments than we are to South Tempe developments, you see that there's just more openness in the project. So I'm not opposed to the projects. I think it can be improved upon. I think it's great with what they're doing with the dog park. And also, you know, I think 30 units an acre is more than dense enough for this area, so an R5 would be perfect. And if you think about it, for an additional 4 units at 12 acres, that's almost 50 units. That's a pretty good return on investment to do a dog park and be able to get those extra units there. So not opposed to it. I think it can be tweaked a little bit to get something that would be just better for the area. So thank you.
Okay, any questions for Ms. Zajac? No, okay. Thank you. All right, Darlene Justice?
My name is Darlene Justice, and I live in North Tempe. I've been president of the North Tempe Neighborhood Association. Now I'm vice president. And I have talked to Mr. Humantel on several occasions. I am very happy about the dog park. I hope the city of Tempe goes along with it because it's a Tempe property, but they don't really maintain it very well now. It's all about all it's good for is political signs. And it's not in good shape. So having a dog park will help keep those little dogs out of the ballpark across the street. Parks maintenance knows about that they have to clean up over there. So that's a really big point. I'm glad that they're getting rid of the parking lots. As Lane had mentioned, that is a huge problem. I drive that, and I know Lane drives it a lot. But we had asked for them to have bigger lighting along the back of the commercial businesses there, the retail, because we've seen there are people that stay in the dumpsters sometimes. They stay in the parking lots and that. And so having this area activated, I think, is a really good thing. When I heard also, and this is something I haven't talked exactly with Charles, but I'm coming to understand a little more too, is I said shame on Tempe for allowing the zoning to change with 2 live works. I thought, why would they set a limit that they could have 2 live works and have 52 units and have this thing go from one type of zoning to mixed use? Well, what I find out is shame on Tempe because we haven't set a limit or a percentage limit. This is 0.0038% of this. And if they had 5 units that were live work, it would be 1% because this is 500 units. I don't understand. They're getting, I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned that We have affordable housing issues in this area and that. Could there be a couple of apartments, they're getting 50, maybe they have a couple more live-work? I haven't talked to Charles about this. He's probably sitting there thinking I'm blindsiding him with it. But I really think that, and the other concern that I know Deb has brought up is that these buildings and that look great, but you see other ones where they, like maybe some of the bottom floor is set back and then the top floor comes forward for additional shade or a different additional look. I can understand they don't want a lot of openness because they're not going to have a fence, so they don't want people just walking in except at the couple of entryways. But I do see the point of that. I do love the double rows of trees along the sidewalk. I think that's wonderful. And I think that this project, I really want us to go forward. But if we give for them, is there a little more they can give for us? And can they maybe look at this a little bit about the design? Could it be modified slightly? Could we have at least 1% or 2% live work? Or maybe we have a couple of units that are affordable housing. City of Tempe needs that really bad. So I think, and let me look and see, I know my time has gone up. I also appreciate the bus stop that they're going to put in. This Camden is right across from Papago Park. We've even had a talk about, they call the other one Camden Hayden, they call this one Camden Papago. But I think that the bus stop should also be reflective of where this is. And so I'm just bringing up a few points. I do want this project to go forward, but I think a little changing. I appreciate all your questions because you answered a lot of things I was going to ask too. Thank you very much.
All right, questions for Ms. Justice? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I have one more card here, and I'm not sure if you wish to speak on this case or the next one for Kim Gaffney Loza. All right.
I am Kim Gaffney Loza, and I'm a Tempe resident and also a member of North Tempe Neighborhood Association. And just a few points. Personally, the design does not bother me at all, especially with the setback, with the landscaping. I think this is actually a good place for high density because there's so much open space surrounding it. And there's a lot of opportunities for people that live there. I'm also a member of the Arizona Native Plant Society. I would love to see a lot of native plants, but I also know that in a very dense situation like this, where you have a lot of people coming and going, especially with a lot of desert trees, they're slow growing and they have a lot of thorns. So depending on who's going to be in those situations, sometimes that's very hard to accommodate native plants. It would be nice if there were some areas or possibly a butterfly garden put in somewhere, you know, especially inside the facility. But I would think that would be up to the residents and the management because that would take a different, you know, amount of management. But I do appreciate the fact that Charles has done so much work talking to our community. He not only had the community meeting he needed to have, he also came and talked to our neighborhood meeting. So I really appreciate that, and I'm looking forward to a much better situation than what we have right now at the Progressive site.
All right, any questions for Ms. Gaffney Loza? Thank you. Mr. Hewlman.
Thank you. We're gratified that we made a number of folks in the community happy. I wish we could make everyone happy and at every point. That doesn't usually happen, and I guess it probably can't happen here. There are some additional things we'd like to talk about that maybe we can do. The cost of the property, the way that we'll develop it makes it not really possible to add affordable housing to this mix. It's not something that's proposed as part of this project, and as you all know, the state legislature has made it impossible for the city to require that to be part of the project. The trees are an interesting point. We've had lots of discussion about landscaping, and I certainly see your point. We would be happy with a stipulation that allowed us to go back and work with staff. We're not opposed to trading out the trees for something that is more desert in its origin. It's interesting, we spent a lot of time on trees in this case because of all the public utilities. And I sort of, when you said it, it didn't make me feel good that we didn't have more of that discussion. It seemed obvious when you said it, but for whatever reason, it didn't seem obvious in the rest of the discussion. But that's why we have these hearings, so we can talk about issues that maybe we hadn't thought of. There isn't a great reason why we don't have those. We like the landscape package that we have. I think we like in particular, and we have had meetings upon meetings upon meetings with various departments to find out where we could put trees, literally within feet, and doing barrier wraps and doing all kinds of other things and moving lines to figure out how we could put trees in and make it effective. We could have had more discussion as well on what that tree is. So if that's a big issue for you and you're otherwise okay with the project, I would suggest a stipulation that would direct staff to work with me prior to council to come up with a landscape package that had a native, the tree placement I think is important, and it's a lot of work to go back and change that, but if you're okay with the project and you're okay with the trees, asking us and giving us the authority, and I'm assuming, obviously we haven't spoken about this, but I'm assuming that's something that you'd be okay with as well. We'd go back and try to find a more native plant. That makes sense for a bunch of different reasons. Mr. Amorosi asked some questions about density, and I guess inadvertently others have too as it relates to live-work. We could do a few more live-work units if that's what made the project work for you. We would caution you as to what that number is and why. And I go back to the sort of the theory of a French grocer. It's great. Live works have historically been hard to fill. In some places, they've been easier to fill. If you're in downtown Tempe, you'd think they'd be super easy to fill, but then you look at the project a block and a half from here, which has changed its name. I can't think what it's called now, but across from the old Zitejas, and they had a really hard time filling their live works. We think that there is some demand for it. It's not unlimited. We think it does a good job in changing the way that corner works, and we think the two that we've proposed work well for that. If you wanted 4 instead of 2, I think that's easy. If you wanted two more than that, if you wanted 6, I think that's easy. That really is probably the end of what we think we will lease. It's the front of our project, and having empty spaces is really a dangerous thing for a project. In fact, I think personally, more than the 4 is tough, because more than the 4, they don't open up to that courtyard. And if they don't open to that courtyard, I don't know that they have the same feel, they look the same, and they work as well. And now you're putting people in units that don't work as well, and that's not great for them or for us. The code is absolutely written to be flexible. It's not an accident, it's not an oversight, it's intentional. We meet that code. We're not sneaking anything by it. In fact, we're going out of our way with the dog park to try to accomplish that. To the extent that that's a concern for the future, you could always entertain a text amendment that would put a limit there. But I would argue against that, because I think in every case you're going to find a situation where you might want something different. We think density works here. And if you don't think density is a great idea here, we'd ask you to sort of go between one side of the lake to the other around 5 o'clock. The traffic there is pretty bad. The city of Tempe has approved lots of office, not only State Farm, but SRP is building a ton of office. I heard on your session just this evening that in the next council meeting, you're going to hear about more office on the north side of the lake. What do we know about people who want to move to Tempe offices? We know that lots and lots of them want to live close to where they work. They want to be able to take the Domenico route to work on a bike and not have to drive. And to the extent that we can provide housing in those areas, that makes sense. And there aren't a lot of places to live that are that close to all the office that we're building along the lake. At some point, a project doesn't work when you have to buy it from an insurance company that doesn't really want to sell it. And so for us to build the project we want, with the amenities we want, and buy the land that we have, unfortunately, there are some unpleasant realities with the numbers. And this is what works for us. We did take a number of units out already at that hard corner. There was some discussion about parking as well. I would say that we have learned a lot from the projects that we own, particularly the one at Curry and Scottsdale Road. And that did have a lower parking ratio. And that lower parking ratio was pretty tight. And so we added to it a little bit. You know, we're less than the code recommends, but we don't think we need that much parking, but we're more than happened at Scottsdale and Curry. And one of the reasons we're more is because we heard from neighbors early on that they thought that was underparked and we wanted a little bit more. So we've tried to address the concerns we heard from the community. And I think that when you can come in with neighbors who really care deeply about their neighborhood and they support the project, that's pretty valuable. They know this area better than anyone. And so we're really proud that we've been able to work with them and that they come enthusiastically. And so I'd answer any questions, but I think I've covered most of the points.
Well, let's see. Are there any more questions for Mr. Hurlman? Commissioner Brown.
It's not unusual for us to ask developers about what the rent might be if these are rental units. Is that something you can wing out there?
Yeah, I can answer it, and I'll ask for more specifics. I mean, obviously, the market is very fluid. I'm always nervous about answering those questions.
Most people give us a wide range, so it's not much of it's kind of soft.
I try to be specific in my answers. It's definitely designed to be a project with amenities. It's certainly not designed to be an affordable community. It's not the most expensive place in town, but it's going to be on the higher end. It will be consistent with the rents next to us in both of our properties. Let me ask what those rents are at the moment. So the current projects that are next to it are about $1.65 a foot. And to put that in some perspective, a lot of the projects downtown are above $2 a foot. Like Salt, for example, I believe is over $2 a foot now.
And what did you pay for the land?
I don't know the answer to that.
Oh.
I'm not sure that we should really be probing into that anyway, truthfully.
Well, we asked about the rent. I just thought we'd sort of see, we hear when projects work, when they don't work, and the mixed use fig leaf is obviously not really holding much water. So.
I appreciate the desire to find out sort of what the market is in general terms. Yeah, okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Commissioner Thornton.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Humanel. I have two questions, one relating to the bus stop.
Yes.
Have you already thought through that? Is it going to be pretty? Is it going to have art components?
Oh, we have thought through it.
Are you going to make us proud?
Frankly, we would rather not put a bus stop in that location given some of the problems in the area, but it's a big issue for staff and we decided not to fight it. At the moment, we've had a lot of discussion on this with staff. The staff has a bus station design that was designed sometime in the 80s or 90s. I think you're all familiar with it. It's a copper top. We don't like that bus stop for this location. We're not particularly opposed to it, but we think that there could be something more exciting. Mr. Iverson, who handles those issues for the city, is somebody we work with on this. He is in the process of working with ASU to design new bus stops, a new standard for Tempe, and we have explained our willingness to participate in some exploratory projects so that we could have a more modern bus stop and more in keeping with the aesthetic. And the city seems open to that. They're still pursuing that process, but it is at our front door. It's not an ideal place for a stop for us. So we have asked to be part of whatever comes next to make it more modern.
Oh, good, that sounds good. Okay, and the other question is about bigger lighting. Mrs. Justice said something about adding bigger lighting to the project.
Yeah, so there are some inherent problems in this part of town at the moment, and we certainly feel the problem as well. There are a lot of folks at night that aren't supposed to be back there that are doing things, and if you were to go in the morning, you'd find empty beer bottles and needles and other paraphernalia. It's what happens in a place where people can hide. And all the things you might imagine seem to have happened there recently. It's how we got in this project originally. It does back up against a shopping center, and so we're cognizant that there is a problem sort of between this shopping, these residential areas and the GID area and the shopping center. By the way, I mean, it is sort of what happens with GID property. This case doesn't go through, this is what you have. You have GID property, and whatever goes there may well be GID, and you'll have more empty space behind something that backs up against a commercial center that's part of really a neighborhood. And so, the Tempe Code does a good job of addressing this already, but we'll work with staff as we go through the construction documents to make sure that that area between the back of our property and that shopping center, which has been a very, that area has had problems since I was in college, which unfortunately was a long time ago, and nothing has really changed. So we think that changing that use could really be helpful. We'll certainly focus on that as we go through the construction documents.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you, Mr. Huelman.
Thank you.
All right. So, commissioners, what are your thoughts? Mr. Amorosi.
I'll go first. All right, I tell you what I like first. I agree that this site should be residential, not general industrial. And so that's needed here. But I like that the setback and we have a wider sidewalk with trees and there's a bike lane. But what's getting me is that the developer's asking for the maximum density here. And I know they have concerns about putting in more live work. I agree. That's a tough sell. But with R5 zoning, you'd be getting 30 units an acre. And so right now you're at 34 units. So I think it's kind of like you're getting this bonus of like what Ms. Sajak said, an extra 45 units on this site. And since 2/3 of these units are 1 bedroom, you're going to be seeing a lot more traffic with this. And you say, if you came in here and said, we want the mixed use zoning, we're going to have the 2 work-live units, and the rest, though, those extra ones could be affordable housing, I'd be able to work with you on that. But I could still see 30 units an acre because you're not on major streets. You're not on Scottsdale Road. And these people here, if you look at the overhead, it's totally wide open. It's wide open towards the lake. It's wide open towards Papago Park. And what I don't know if the neighbors realize that 60 feet right there on that corner with 397 units is a really high density project for that area, where I think it should be more scaled down because nothing around that area is that high. And yet we're not getting affordable housing, and we're not getting, it just seems like they have to have the MU4. And I think the R5, because it really is just residential, would be a better fit. Thank you.
All right. Other comments? Vice Chair DiDomenico.
Commissioner Amorosi, I hear where you're coming from, and I'd spend a lot more time thinking about it if I would have seen a flood of people from the neighborhood who were concerned about the density, or if we were talking about something that wasn't as, this is a de minimis increase over the R5 zoning, 4 units per acre. They could lop off half of the building at the, in the back side of the project, or up behind the shopping center, throw some garages in there instead to rent out, and it would have zero impact, I think, on the neighborhood. It wouldn't look any different. You'd just, lose those extra 4 units per acre. So I don't think we'd get a better project for the neighborhood. The point about being able to see through the buildings, or having the amenity space that was maybe front loaded instead of interior loaded. Some projects or some parts of town that's helpful because it helps the view that you get when you drive by it. But that open space that that we talk about, it's really for the residents that who live here, the 500 unit or renters who will be here. The open space should benefit their quality of life more so than those of us who drive by it a couple of times a month. So they could easily take this building that's on the frontage of these streets and push it back and move all those parking spaces that are being hidden now to the street side. And I think that the community would get an uglier view as they drive by every day. So I'm okay with the design. You know, we could ask for another 2 or 4, you know, live-work units. And I don't think we get a better project. I don't think it's going to impact the community to get a couple more live-work units. I was a part of this body when the whole mixed-use zoning was, you know, was talked about. And to some people, mixed use means that you've got residential and you've got some retail mixed in. And to them, that's what it meant. A lot of the projects we've seen, you know, it can be office with a little bit of residential. Residential doesn't even have to be a part of it. It can be office and retail. You know, we didn't know what mixed use really meant. And so it was left flexible so that we could learn as we go. But since there isn't a written rule yet of how much mix you've got to put into the mix, I'm comfortable with the project as it is. And the funniest part about the discussion today, which I would have bet money on, is we would have spent a whole lot of time talking about materials and balconies and window coverings and those kinds of things. And it's obviously visually pleasing enough that I didn't hear anyone from the public nor anyone yet from our group even talk about that. So, you know, that's kind of impressive, I think. So I'm going to support the project.
All right. Other comments?
And not just because of the bike lane.
All right, Commissioner Loy.
I just wanted to follow up on that. I think the applicant stated it is, you know, I don't think we want more see-through first floor space that happens to be something that's fulfilling a mixed use obligation. So I would just want to caution whatever the body decides here, that we don't push for something that the market won't demand on that.
Commissioner Brown.
So we often hear discussions about what the market will demand and what's the this and that. I think we're still, there's more to it than just the money and how many square feet, how many units, how many bedrooms. I would agree that the design is a little packed. If you look at the open space, there's a nice pool area. And pretty much, oh, and there's one little courtyard between buildings, 4 stories. The rest of it is packed, solid street parking with very little, I mean, it's a mathematical exercise, which I think is, I mean, let's face it, it's intended to maximize profit, which we understand. But I do think that they've gone a little far on the density. The design is not that appealing. It's not bad, but when you look at it and you realize that this, what appears to be a 500-foot stretch of buildings, maybe it's only 380, whatever it is pretty much the theme of every side of every building. It's, I think, rather de minimis.
All right. Commissioner Thornton.
I'd like to thank the community members who came out this evening and shared with us your concerns and mostly your approval pretty much for this project, which means a lot to me also. I love this project. I think it looks good. I think it's being put in the right spot. I just like it. And so I'm also going to be supporting it.
Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you. I don't have serious concerns with the density of the project. This is also on my commute, so I'll be impacted by this development. I appreciate the dog park and bike lanes. On my commute, I see people walking their dogs up and down this stretch all the time, every single morning, every single afternoon. I would appreciate when we do put forward a a motion, sorry, that we do include expanding the plant palette to include more, I don't know how we would word it, but more native plants or more Sonoran Desert style plants to the landscape palette. Thank you.
Okay, fair enough. I think you've all covered things pretty well. I will say briefly that I kind of initially felt like we were maybe being had just a little bit, in that we were getting a little more density out of this project than maybe was warranted, and the MU4 was a convenient way to do that. And I wouldn't ask for more live work units or offices or anything like that. My thought was maybe it just needs to be a little less dense, but now that we've talked it through, I've been persuaded that a little more density does make sense here. I like the project, and I would support a stipulation that suggested we take another look at the plantings and consider more desert plantings if that's something other commissioners are interested in. I'd be happy to support the project without that stipulation as well.
If I could propose a stipulation that might address the native species, is that appropriate?
All right.
And Lee, if you want to chime in, you're going to have to work with me to do this. We like the idea. We're happy to do it. We need the authority to do it and not slow down the process. So I would suggest that the applicant shall work with staff to replace trees with native species as appropriate. I think that gives you the leeway to change out the landscape plan prior to council. But maybe you and Ryan can talk about that and see if you think it meets it.
Did you say plants or trees? Sorry.
Trees. Oh, we could do plants.
Yeah, I would make it more general, please.
Ground cover and plants, I think, covers everything. Yeah, sure. Agreed.
All right. So, how about a motion?
Can you acknowledge that?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chairman, I would propose approval of Camden Hayden, I'm catching it down here, Camden Hayden 2, which is PL 180288, with the stipulations proposed by staff in the public report, as well as the additional stipulation just read into the record by Mr. Hulemantel. And that's it.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
All right, motion to, Ryan, do you have all right, motion to approve from Vice Chair DiDomenico with some stipulations, and seconded by Commissioner Thornton. All those in favor by show of hands, please. And opposed? Motion passes 5-2 with Commissioners Brown and Amorosi in dissent. Okay. We have one more item on our agenda. And let's see. Who's going to be presenting this for us? Thank you. Mr. LeVake.
Members of the commission, if you don't mind, I'll present at the seat right here. So if you recall, this request is for accessory dwellings and guest quarters, consisting of changes within the zoning and development code for accessory dwellings, an amendment to the guest quarters regulations found in section 3-401, 3-402, and 3-411. The applicant is the city of Tempe. So approximately about a year ago, we had an ordinance draft proposed and came to you all with the recommendations for accessory dwelling units and guest quarters. That recommendation was approved, went on to city council. The first city council hearing, this item was tabled indefinitely. We had met with the working group in December of 2018. The working group discussed some of the provisions identified in the draft ordinance. We made some recommended changes and decided to then go out to the public again to get further public input on this requested item. We held a public meeting in early January. It was well attended. We had over 30 residents participate in the public discussions on the item, and then we made some additional changes proposed to this request. Most significantly, the accessory dwelling unit provisions, which I'll summarize, is basically the ability to allow an accessory dwelling in a currently multifamily zone property that currently has a single-family use on the property. So I'll say, for example, these multifamily district properties are allowed to have 2 or possibly 3 dwelling units on the site by right. What this would allow an owner to do is place an accessory dwelling, a subordinate dwelling that's smaller than the main residence, to be able to count still the property as a single-family use. And what that does is relieves them from the burden of doing an administrative design review with the city. It removes landscape requirements, lighting standards, perimeter wall requirements, and some of the typical landscape parking lot island requirements that you'd see in a more traditional multifamily development. A lot of properties in Maple Ash area, for example, have kind of gone through their own process to get an accessory dwelling or an alley unit on their property and go through a very onerous process of about applying for about 11 or 12 variances to be able to get relief from the code to make it happen. This process would allow an ADU unit to be built complying with the development standards for setbacks, height, lot coverage, and then still treat the property as a single-family use, but being able to have a second support rental unit for the property. The major change that we've changed from last year was that we increased the maximum building size for an ADU from 600 square feet to 800 square feet. So this is livable area. We still have some of the provisions that was recommended from the Neighborhood Advisory Commission. We limited the total number of bedrooms to no more than 2. There was some concerns of whether or not how many bedrooms that someone would be placing in this ADU unit. Additionally, the other component of this code text amendment includes guest quarters. So today, right now, properties of a minimum 15,000 square foot lot size in single-family zoning properties can propose a guest quarters, which is intended to house guests of the main residents of the site. The proposed amendment is proposing to expand that to allow properties of a minimum 8,000 square feet in lot size to allow guest quarters, complying with the standards and setbacks in the zoning district. The earlier ordinance had proposed 10,000 square feet. We're now recommending 8,000 square feet because there was a large support from the community, about over 75%, that wanted to see more areas that could allow guest quarter regulations in their lots. They felt the 9,000 range could accommodate a guest quarters without creating a large impact on the property. And I'll answer any questions the commission may have on this code text amendment.
All right. Commissioners, any questions? Commissioner Amorosi.
So Ryan, yeah, going down from 10,000 to 8,000 square feet, and then does that mean the units, you're still going to hold the open space on single-family properties or coverage of units? Wouldn't that, so can you still fit like an 800 square foot guest quarters on an 8,000 square foot property if there's other structures there? How does that work?
Certainly. Commissioner Amorosi, members of the commission, most of the properties that are probably in the 8,000 to 9,000 square foot range are typically R1-6 zoning properties, which basically are a minimum 6,000 square foot lot size. Those properties have a lot coverage allowance of 45%. And so the residents, as well as the guest quarters or any other accessory buildings for that matter, would count against that total allowed lot coverage. They still have to comply with the setbacks, whether it's attached to the main residence or an accessory building that was detached from it, but they'll have to comply with those standards of setbacks required for that property.
Thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Levesque?
Right, I love the idea. I'm a supporter of this change. The thing that in reviewing the packet that stood out to me is that it's really this is an opportunity that's available to a North Tempe property owner, and in South Tempe, where the properties tend to be larger lot sizes, this really isn't going to come into play. And the underlying zoning is obviously the question, but I may be missing something, but philosophically, if this is a good thing for someone with an 8,000-foot single-family lot in North Tempe, then it certainly should make sense for that same lot in South Tempe, but yet we're not treating them the same. And I realize that the differentiation is the underlying zoning category, but the impact on surrounding properties, you know, the look and feel and operation of the neighborhoods is the same. So and it seemed like when we did the survey, even though it's not real scientific, I think there were only like 70 or 80 people that responded, but people seemed universally in favor of extending this even further than we are. So my question is, why not go further?
It's certainly a discussion item that the city manager's working group had. I think ultimately they want to evaluate the program a year from now, see how effective it's been, who's taken advantage of it, what's been built. So there's an opportunity to reevaluate. I think when we first implemented the first expansion of the guest quarters from just AG, we went to the commission, we explored 10, 12, and 15,000 square foot lot size. And I believe at that time, it was in 2008 or 2009, the commission said, well, this will be our first time look at it. Let's start sensitively, and we started with 15,000 square foot lot sizes. But, you know, it's kind of been a long time, but this is the opportunity to kind of expand it further. Maybe there's an opportunity to reevaluate and see how appropriate the program has been implemented.
And just so I'm clear to the other commissioners, the reason for it, you can still get the same building built on the 8,000-foot lot in South Tempe. You can still go through the process, come up with the same product. The difference is who can live in it. And if you build the 800 square foot beautiful little thing and you meet all the setbacks and you're doing it in North Tempe, you can now lease it out. College student, someone here visiting from a foreign country who's going to ASU, or whatever you want to do with it. If you do that in South Tempe on a single family zone property, you can allow guests to stay there for no compensation. And so it's got the same impact, presumably. You know, those people still probably have a car and they still come and go and they still make noise and do whatever. But as we start thinking more about these multi-generational families where mom comes back to live with you, maybe mom's got a pension, or mom's, she's thinking, should I go live with Mike in his accessory dwelling unit in the backyard, or go to, pay money and go live in some other assisted living facility. And, I've got money. I want to help him cover the costs for this thing he just built for me. But you can't do that. Or you've got to play some sort of a game, where it's they're not paying you rent, and it's under the table. And then you make the city kind of be a policeman. To me, I hope we look at it a year from now and go the step further. So.
All right, Commissioner Lloyd.
And I like the concept too when we talk about, the idealistic aging in place, bringing the aging parents back. But I guess my concern is if it's not that case, and if we're allowing 2 bedrooms and now all of a sudden parking's an issue in neighborhoods. So can you just speak a little bit to what kind of stopgaps we have in place so the density on our street parking isn't impacted and things of that nature?
So, Commissioner Lloyd, are you referring to the accessory dwelling units?
Correct. I mean, it talks about that there's no change in, the on-site parking in the front yard, et cetera. But then let's just say you have 2 extra people now in the backyard and each of them have a car and nothing changed to the driveway. So now there's 2 more cars in the street and you repeat that process, it could be problematic.
So the accessory dwelling unit regulations proposed right now does not require additional parking spaces. That's not to say that the resident or the property owner developing it could add a garage or could accommodate additional driveway space for the property site. we thought it was important enough to be flexible and to discourage that whether or not the ADU unit would be bringing in additional vehicle traffic in the area, but if there's an opportunity to be able to have a less intense opportunity, that reduction on the parking demand would be proved beneficial. A lot of these neighborhoods that have the ADU dwelling unit provisions, for the most part, have permit parking. So there's a control mechanism currently with the Transportation Division on seeking permits for your dwelling on your site. We're hoping to work with them a little more closely so that they can evaluate and know that we don't have an excessive amount of permits. Some of the bigger concerns around the existing parking issues right now, like around the campus area of ASU, is basically there's apps that people can actually rent out their driveway space to be able to get close enough to campus in lieu of paying for campus parking. And so that's been some of the bigger problems that we've been facing with, is people deciding to park off-site into the neighborhoods and then walk to campus. But we're hopeful that the residents that live there in that area can manage it appropriately so there won't be a major impact.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Levesque. I have one card here. If anyone else from the audience wishes to speak, find a card, fill it out. I have Merrill Darcy.
Thank you, commissioners. I've read the ordinance, and I like the idea. I think it's a progressive, and it's about time that certain areas have the ADUs, which my understanding is that it's only 200 single-family properties that would be even qualified for ADUs, and something around maybe 3,500 properties in single-family that would be qualified for the guest quarters. My problem is in some of the in the R3 and the multifamily. Historically, a lot of these were originally single-family homes built in 1920, 1930, 1940, 1950, and now some of them have actually been split in half. So now we have one address with an AB with front and rear, or we have an address and a half. So my question is that I like the ordinance to specify that these units won't be adding a third unit and so the single family definition is okay by me, but some single families are now duplexes. And so that would be, adding the density on that. And the guest quarters I like with the 8,000 square feet, but it doesn't say whether it's attached or detached. And can all of us here convert our garage into a studio apartment and then just take the overhead doors and then convert that? Or can we put something else in the back, but it doesn't have to be attached or detached? And I think the guest quarters now is usually attached in the smaller units like that. And so I also like they're talking about the expansion of the transportation overlay district in some areas. And I think it would be more appropriate to have ADUs in the single-family residential areas that are in proximity to the transportation overlay district. So if you have any questions on that, so.
Questions for Mr. Darcy? Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Levesque?
Yes, so one of the questions I understand was, what if the property had a duplex or wanted to add an additional third unit on the property? So the way the ordinance is drafted is the property has to currently be a single-family use property, meaning one existing residence on the site to be eligible for the ADU provision. If the property were to propose to add a third unit, which may be allowed by that zoning district if it's R3 zoning, for example, or if they wanted to expand the accessory dwelling unit beyond the 800 square foot area, the property would have to come into compliance with the multifamily use standards that are required for that property, and thus no longer being considered an accessory dwelling. Comments about the guest quarters. So Guest quarters can either be attached to the main residence, detached, part of a accessory building garage. So it's possible to have these different scenarios. Primarily, the reason that what defines a guest quarters is that if you don't have integral access through the main residence, meaning there's no more support mechanism to use all the living space environment within the main dwelling area there. So the guest quarters, with a real covenant restriction on the property that it can't be rented or leased separately, would allow someone to have basically a sleeping room space and a full bathroom area that can accommodate some living environment that would not primarily be used for separate rental uses.
All right. Did you want to speak?
If I'm allowed to, am I?
I have a question for Mr. Levesque.
Fill out a card afterwards.
Fill out a card. Colby Granville, Tempe, Arizona.
Can we come back to you?
So Commissioners, I just wanted to, first off, just by saying thank you for taking this up again. I know you've taken it up once before. This is an issue that I brought up initially about 4.5 or 5 years ago. And it's just now sort of finally got its way through the system a second or third time, depending on how you count. To go to your question, Commissioner DiDomenico, this has been a long road coming, and so at a certain point you sort of take the open field, and that is why the limiting factor is related. Certainly there is, in my mind, a place for it in South Tempe, but there's likely to be more resistance to passing it as it relates to residents in South Tempe because, as you pointed out, concerns regarding parking, changing the nature of the character of the neighborhood, these sort of things. So the reason I would assume that it was focused only on ones with the correct underlying zoning is it does two things. One, it allows us the ability to build density without height, which is something that a lot of neighborhoods in the Maple Ash area and et cetera are worried about. This helps with potentially workforce or affordable housing because the new units that you guys see every day that go up, they're not cheap units, right? They're $350,000 units because you're paying for that land. In this case, someone has already paid for that land, and so there's at least the opportunity for a more reasonably priced unit. And so the hope is that by giving someone the ability to do something else with this property and make it revenue generating, it solves some of the difficulties related to workforce housing without adding more height. But additionally, it takes some of the pressure off of the landowner to sell to the highest bidder, right? So you might have a landowner who says, I was gonna sell and have them put in a fourplex, but now I'll build a unit in the back, and it now makes logical economic sense to do this instead of this other thing, which we tend to see a lot of and tends to not be affordable. Whatever decisions you all make, I know you'll make it in a learned and thoughtful manner. I appreciate that. And I'm very grateful that this has come back. It's been a long time coming. So thank you for your consideration.
All right. Any questions for Mr. Granville? Thank you. Anything, Mr. Levesque?
I had a question.
Oh, yes, all right. Yes.
Nothing further to add other than, a lot of the public comments expressed support for this because they saw this as an incentive to the residents or the owners of the property that exists today. A lot of code text amendments usually feel like they're developer incentive related code changes, but this is specifically would support those of the existing residential base that could decide to reinvest or invest more into their property to maintain ownership of the property. And that was some of the goals.
Commissioner Amorosi.
Thank you, Chairman Lyon. Ryan, so my understanding, guest quarters could not have a full kitchen?
Guest quarters could have a kitchen, yes.
They could have a kitchen
Yes.
too, okay. And to Mr. Darcy's point about, was there any discussion about allowing ADUs in R1 zoning? rather than the guest quarters?
It's certainly contemplated. The common practice for introducing accessory dwelling units is that they are in single-family zone properties. We're kind of doing an ADU light right now to address kind of the development impacts to some of the areas around the ASU campus, but traditionally, accessory dwelling unit ordinances are introduced in single-family zone properties. Several cities throughout the state, California being one of them that has a lot of ADU provisions. But again, as expressed, that is a different type of impact. There's an opportunity to evaluate in the coming year or so to see if there's interest in pursuing a greater expansion of ADUs in other single-family areas. But that would certainly delve into a more robust process, engaging further public outreach and probably different regulations than what are currently proposed in this ADU ordinance.
Great, thanks.
All right. So, public comment closed. Commissioner discussion. Any comments? Or do I hear a motion?
I'll just say I support this. Councilman Granville hit the topic. The reason for me for pursuing something like this as a city is we talk about we see it every once in a while. A project comes through and it adds to the affordable housing stock. Occasionally, something along Apache will add, 20 or 30 units or something, and we feel good about that. But we're so far behind, and most of the redevelopment projects that we approve tend to be, mobile homes, manufactured housing areas that are being taken down. So we're actually probably pulling more out of our affordable housing stock. I see this as the real road to quickly adding it, and not on the backs of city funding or incentives, but just by the sheer economics of it, and having individual homeowners do it. I think that's the only way we're going to make a dent in it. So I'm all for it, and spread south. Go south.
All right, other comments? I'll say I think it's a good thing, and I am supporting it. Shall we have a motion?
Make a motion. I vote we approve the accessory dwelling units PL 170425.
All right, motion to approve from Commissioner Amorosi and seconded by Commissioner Thornton. All those in favor by show of hands, please. And the motion passes 7-0. All right, those are all of our agenda items, gentlemen. Ladies.
Thank you.
I looked at our audience and saw only gentlemen, but I realized I should address the commission as well. Staff announcements?
Thank you, Commission. For the next regular scheduled meeting of February 26th, we have 5 agenda items. That's a development plan review for new multifamily residential development consisting of 11 two-story condominium units for Hudson Lane condominiums at 55 West Hudson Lane. There's a request for a development plan review for a new 9-story, 220 square foot office building at the Grand at Papago Park Center, 1121 West Washington Street. We have a request for a use permit to allow massage establishment for first-class reflexology at 725 South Rural Road. Another request for a use permit to allow massage establishment for therapeutic retreat located at 1553 West Todd Drive. And finally, we have a request for a use permit to allow car wash in the GID district and a development plan review for a new Francis & Sons Express Car Wash at 2121 West University Drive.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are adjourned.